Okay, thanks all of you for being here. We don't bite. You can come sit up front. I hope some other folks come, but come on forward if you want to. But anyway, good afternoon. I'm Ann Rundall, Commissioner from Washington, and so pleased to have you here this afternoon. Hope you had a good lunch and that you are ready to delve into this really important topic of the next generation of customer assistance in an ongoing pandemic. One of the issues that most states and utilities have grappled with since March 2020 is significant billing arrearages as customers have been unable to pay bills and as states and cities have adopted disconnection moratoria across the country. The financial impact of the pandemic is something that the subcommittee on COVID-19 addressed over the last year. As the chair of that subcommittee, which is a working group of NARUC's Emergency Preparedness, Recovery, and Resiliency Task Force, I want to let you know that the subcommittee has just completed its lessons learned report. Copies are available at NARUC's CPI desk near the just out in the lobby there. And it's also available on NARUC's website, and it did address some of these issues, but there's a lot more work to be done. Because of that ongoing work and nature of the pandemic, NARUC plans to host a series of webinars and regulator roundtables on ongoing customer impacts stemming from the pandemic and innovative customer assistance efforts to address the significant increase in customer arrearages. This is the first of those sessions, and we have a great panel here today to present their perspectives and discuss innovative collaborations between electric utilities and public assistance organizations, state and community organizations, as well as ways to streamline and automate bill assistance to ease customer hardship and ensure ongoing utility sector financial health. Our panel today includes the Honorable Maida Coleman, Commissioner from Missouri, Chris Ayers, President of NASUCA and Executive Director of the North Carolina Utilities Commission Public Staff. We have Monica Whiting, Vice President of Customer Experience and Chief Customer Officer with Arizona Public Service Corporation, or APS, and she is on the line with us, as well as Katrina Metzler, Executive Director of the National Energy and Utility Affordability Coalition, or NUAC, here with us today. Each panelist is going to begin with some introductory remarks, and then we'll have some time for questions and dialogue, and hope to have a few minutes for questions from all of you at the end. So let's start with you, Commissioner Coleman, and let us know your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you all also for being here. Is it on?
I don't know that it's on. Is it on?
Is that all I needed to do? Turn it on? Boy, I tell you, I can screw something up so quickly. Well, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So I'll begin my comments with our typical disclaimer that my comments here today are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Missouri Public Service Commission, nor any of my other colleagues on the commission. For those who don't know me, in addition to my role as a commissioner with the Missouri Public Service Commission, until just recently, I was the chair of the NARUC Committee on Consumers and the Public Interest. We have a 3-year term limit on those terms, so therefore my term recently ended, but I wanted to give you some idea of the types of work we did under my leadership on the Committee on Consumers and the Public Interest. One of the things that we did that is on the NARUC website under publications is our Emergency Preparedness Guide for Consumers. It's a very detailed description of different types of weather emergencies and the process by which you can prepare yourself for emergencies and what utility companies are doing in the process of this weather calamity. So please always use it as a resource to get an idea of what you can do to prepare for bad weather. There was also a poverty simulation. And one of the things I'm really proud of is the first joint resolution between NARUC and NSUCA transpired under my leadership. It identified best practices for data collection. I'm going to share some details about the emergency guide and the poverty simulation now, and will later highlight some practices, the best practices from the joint resolution later in the panel discussion. As I noted a few minutes ago about the emergency preparedness guide for consumers, it's called Consumers and Catastrophes Guide. And it was organized by disaster type and includes information highlighting relevant information to assist consumers as they prepare for and respond to emergencies. Is distinguishable from other emergency preparation guides in that it focuses on the impact of disasters and emergencies on utilities, and that it is the guide is accessible, as I noted, on the NARUC website, and state commissions and other stakeholders can use the guide's resources for their consumer outreach and education. In Missouri, we keep that guide on our website so that the residents of the state of Missouri can pull it up at any time whenever there are bad weather forecasts. It's, as I said, a great guide. I actually, since I'm in Missouri and we're part of the Midwest, certainly we have bad weather. We have tornadoes, which is something that's really scary for all of us. And MARC, which is the Mid-Atlantic, I think that's what we're, Mid-America, started with an A, Mid-America region of this organization consists of 14 states. I always make sure that we send this information out throughout the Midwest every time we see some bad weather on the way. The poverty simulation took place at NARUC Summer Policy Summit in July of 2019 with over 100 participants, including regulators, utility industry leaders, staff, and consumer advocates. We identified factors impacting consumer decisions related to utility payments and highlighted challenges and dueling priorities facing low-income consumers and vulnerable populations. And we also explored specific ways commissions, utilities, consumer advocates, and other stakeholders can collaborate to address the challenges as they relate to the affordability of utilities. None of us could have ever predicted what would happen in 2020 with the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic. For those of us in the utility and energy industry, we were already having conversations about utility affordability, disconnections, and delinquencies. This has positioned us well, I believe, to address the increased affordability challenges that have resulted from the pandemic. I am looking forward to we being able to share our experiences today and insights and provide some tools that all stakeholders can use to engage and support struggling consumers. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So Chris Ayers, if you go ahead and give us your perspective from NSUCA and from North Carolina, thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. Well, good afternoon. You know, the pandemic continues and, you know, consumer advocates still have our eye on the ball with respect to the continuing pressing needs of consumers. But as we hopefully are beginning to come out of the pandemic at some point, we've also got an eye on the future. And what did we learn? What best practices did we develop during the last couple of years that we want to make sure we continue going forward? While the pandemic has been a crisis and it's forced customer issues to the forefront, it's also driven innovation in terms of customer assistance, and innovation that we think should continue as a course of normal practice going forward. Let me just tell you about 3 or 4 different examples and programs, approaches that some of the states across NSUCA undertook. First, let me just shout out to Delaware. They were able to harness the federal money that they received, and they were able to wipe out all consumer arrearages in the state of Delaware. I mean, that's just awesome. They just took the eraser and wiped it out. Now, there won't always be a big pot of money like that going forward to do that, but Delaware, Drew Slater's the advocate up there, they got on it and were able to deliver real relief to customers up there. South Carolina. So South Carolina implemented a program called South Carolina State Plus, and that was a emergency rental assistance program. Looked at covering 12 months of past due rent plus 3 months of future rent, as well as utilities. And they were able to connect that money directly from the support to the utility itself. So you're cutting out the middlemen and getting that money right into the accounts of customers. Now, South Carolina identified a number of challenges in this process. Applicants generally had insufficient documentation. Landlords were required to participate, and so you just got lower application rates all the way around. So one of the things, South Carolina actually learned a number of lessons there that I think are applicable to all of us, and that is find ways to streamline the application process. The easier, more straightforward the application process is, the more people are going to see through that process and get the help that they need. I also found that there's the need for a lot of in-person support, and processing experiences needed to evolve in order to help the applicant experience, so that folks don't get frustrated and give up. There's also some barriers, some community barriers out there. And so South Carolina identified a number of community organizations to partner with in order to overcome these access barriers. And that included a lot of locally driven strategies to reach folks, hard to reach folks, particularly in rural areas, and ensure that they were connected to resources. So South Carolina, their lesson learned coming out of there was focusing on connecting people to resources and getting creative, innovative, and bring in some of those community organizations to help bridge that gap. So Wisconsin entered into a settlement agreement with their utilities up there. And one of the things that they were focused on was late fees, and the fact that bad debt expenses are built into rates, and that can be relied upon as a source of revenue for utilities. And so they actually entered into a settlement up in Wisconsin that required late fee dollars to be allocated directly to bad debt uncollectible write-offs. So that actually reflects the relationship between arrears management programs, which of course helps financially constrained customers, and the late fees that serve to deter delinquency. So using the late fees to cover the cost of collection and the remainder to offset the arrearage management write-offs really helps everybody there. Wisconsin also had a low income forgiveness tool where there was a percentage of the customer was required to pay back, and then the remaining percentage was forgiven. And I know there's some other utilities, I believe Ameren and Missouri, I think did something like that at one point. And so the tackling the late fee issue and making sure that that is used in a way to actually benefit customers was a theme and a lesson learned out of Wisconsin. The third state that I'll mention is Illinois. So Illinois really focused on data collection. And I was going to mention the joint resolution that NARUC and NSUCA did back in 2019. But Illinois started grappling with the question of, well, who are the customers and what are their needs? And so they did a deep dive on that and got the commission to approve requirements for data collection and data reporting that is reported to their commission. A lot of work on trying to get data and connect that data to the utilities. You know, the state agencies wouldn't necessarily be able to give the data, all the data to the utility, but the utility could give the data to the state agency, and the state agency could use that to identify, all right, who's vulnerable, who's in need, and let's try and get ahead of this curve and ensure that we have a head start on connecting people to the resources that they need. But the data collection, including disconnections, notices of disconnections, number of payment plans, late fees, all this stuff by zip code and census tract, which is helpful. And they use that data to help push out LIHEAP funds without requiring applications. And utilities were able to identify existing or recent LIHEAP customers that had arrearages, again, proactively connecting people to the resources. And so the takeaways there in Illinois were that reported metrics and arrearage data showing where and how much customers are behind really should be a permanent requirement because there's always going to be the need to help customers going forward, even outside of pandemic, and really continue flexibility for utilities to accommodate energy insecurities and energy burdens. And then Illinois also took a stab at defining what affordability meant, and that was at or below 6% of annual household income. So just 3 examples there. A lot of states have done a lot of other things, but I'm pleased to say consumer advocates and worked with utilities to try and come up with innovative ways to help customers during the pandemic. And I think these approaches have some staying power going forward.
Thank you, Chris. That's very helpful. And I know Washington has used some of those methods and is collecting data, but there's a lot more work to be done. So we're actually going to go, I think, to Monica Whiting there virtually. For those of you in the room, she's on the screen. Thank you for joining us, Monica. Let's turn to you and get your perspective from the utility.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so virtually. I think we'll have a lot of the same themes that we just heard Chris talk about, but APS has spent the last year and a half working with 40+ community assistance partners, stakeholders and interveners, low-income and consumer advocates, our corporation commission, state agencies, and our customers through a customer advisory board, focus groups, with the real focus of improving and addressing our overall customer experience related to credit and collection. Our collaboration really focused on simplification for customers and the agencies, making sure we were being more customer-centric in really assessing our processes and our policies. We wanted to increase our program participation. We really felt like we had opportunities there. And a big part of the foundation too was ways to be flexible and to work with our customers. I will say it has not necessarily been an easy journey, but it's been one of growth, and it's been one that has been very rewarding. We have moved, and I think if you talk to some of our stakeholders and interveners, they would say the same thing. We've moved from a space of perhaps an adversarial relationship a year and a half of one to one that is truly collaborative, where we're finding common ground and we're putting practical solutions into place. Our guiding principles in this work were first and foremost, be customer-centric, make sure we're looking at this from the outside in, make sure that we can find common ground and move forward. If we're going to ask for input, we have to listen and use the input. We want to ensure everything we do verbally and non-verbally demonstrates empathy and dignity, particularly to our customers who are struggling. Keep it simple. I think we heard Chris say that. And one of the key foundations was really working to set up a partnership with our customers and ensure that what we're doing is we're working in good faith mutually, and then be transparent. So what I'd like to do is share a little bit of what those actual changes were that we put in place and the results that we're seeing. And then in some of the follow-up questions, we can get to how. So first, let's look at our business processes. And I'll say that these are changes that were certainly put in place from the lessons we were learning from COVID, but I can say that the vast majority will remain in place going forward because we have found so much success. First of all, we increased our disconnect threshold as far as the dollar amount that we would look to disconnect more than 6 times or sixfold. We still today continue to waive late fees for our customers, give them time to pay down their balances. Moratoriums. We did have a 10-month moratorium in 2020 with COVID, but recognizing that Arizona is a state that experiences extreme heat during the summer, we have now an annual seasonal moratorium, and so we will, continue this every year. As we come off of our moratoriums, we have found that applying automatic payment arrangements for customers that are past due is working. And so we just recently came off of our summer moratorium and automatically put 6-month payment arrangements into place. We've also changed the flexibility of our payment arrangements. We allow customers to reestablish payment arrangements for a longer period of time if they need more time, up to 24 months. We will accept partial payments, and in some cases, we have gone ahead and reworked that with no payment at all, and in helping connect them to customer assistance. Streamlining and working with the local agencies has been very important. Just as Chris shared, it can be very complicated for customers to have to gather all of the documentation, go to multiple sources, and apply. And so we have worked with our commission and with stakeholders and streamlined our income verification to 200% of poverty level. And that is allowing us to do a lot of auto enrolling, sharing information with the customer's permission across the different programs, and stacking programs as well. And then also looking at some shared portals that we've been a part of helping fund and develop with the different partner agencies. In the space of communications, we have increased both targeted and mass communications for customer education. We have used our paid advertising dollars to communicate both in English and Spanish across radio, television, billboard, convenience store, and paid digital advertising, specifically focused on our Here to Help campaign, which has been all customer assistance, our payment arrangements, and energy efficiency, with over 85 million impressions in 2021. We likewise changed our business processes to have more communication with our customers around their payment arrangements, if they might have missed a payment before going into the disconnection cycle and during the disconnection cycle, using mail, email, and phone. And we actually are finding that email is the most effective communication channel. We also put a lot of focus into our advisor training to make sure our advisors were educated, well-equipped, and had the right empathy and skill set to service our customers. And then we partnered with community agencies on heat relief programs, connecting customers with assistance through referrals, as well as emergency shelters, AC repair, and replacement. So it's a lot of what we did. Now let's talk a little bit about the results. We found that over 95% of our customers that entered into the credit and collection process avoided disconnection. They did this by either seeking assistance, which we helped connect them with, making a payment arrangement, and partial payments. We've issued in 2021 over 200,000 payment arrangements. We have seen, prior to the changes in our policy, when we look back pre-moratoriums and pre-COVID, at a 3-year average, we were disconnecting typically about 7% of our customers. Today, that number is down to 1%. And I see that as a direct correlation to the increase in our communication, but more importantly, the partnership in the good faith focus of partnering with our customers and the policy changes we've made. Likewise, our energy support program, we do offer lifeline rates or discounted rates for low-income customers. We have seen enrollment in that program increase 20% this year, again, a part of our auto enrollment. We have seen our customer assistance through federal, state, and our own and regional programs increase 75% in the number of customers getting assistance and doubling the dollar amount. that we're able to provide to customers. And so that's been really phenomenal. Likewise, we measure communication awareness. Are our customers more aware now today of our assistance programs and the different items? And we are seeing that, yes, in fact, communication recall amongst our customers, specifically in customer assistance and energy efficiency, has increased and is on par with industry best practices. And our customer complaints are down over 25%. So I've hit a lot of data and information and numbers, but I also wanted to share some quotes that we have received that I think mark the cultural change that we have gone through and that we will continue to have going forward. I shared a little bit about our focus on our really training our employees and our advisors and having that focus on dignity and empathy. And I loved this quote from one of our care center supervisors in describing the transformation that she is seeing and experiencing. And that quote is, our advisors are learning to speak up on behalf of our customers versus speaking up on behalf of the company. We're learning how to challenge the process instead of the customer. Our advisors and employees across the company are empowering themselves and their peers to do the right thing for our customers. Likewise, a quote that we got from a customer who completed a survey. I was scared to call in and admit I'm having financial problems. The rep made me feel like I was human and that APS would work with me, and this wouldn't be an issue. We came up with a plan. I made a payment, I hung up, and I felt heard and connected with the rep. I got off and cried happy tears. Thank you, APS, for training your employees correctly and hiring people with huge hearts. And finally, from our stakeholders and partners, we meet monthly with them. Just this last month, we heard some of our stakeholders say, we are so pleased with the changes and the improvements, and we are hearing the same from our constituents. These improvements over the last year are nothing short of miraculous. Thank you. So again, I know I shared a lot of information, but wanted to give a flavor for the successes that we're seeing from the utility perspective. That is truly a partnership with our stakeholders, our customers, our commission, and we're very proud of the progress, and we look forward to continuing and know we have only just begun.
Thank you very much, Monica. That was really helpful. And we'll get back to you with some questions. But first, we're going to go to Katrina Metzler and have her give some perspective on a national front as well.
Did anybody else want to stand up and cheer when Monica was reading those quotes from her folks? I think that's wonderful. And I even wrote some of them down. I love the quote, we're learning how to challenge the process rather than the customer. That really rang true with me. So thank you for your remarks. I also reacted really strongly to what you were saying, Chris. I think that issuing those supplemental benefits like you were talking about as part of your best practices, where we identify customers who were previously eligible for LIHEAP, they've already completed an application, they've already submitted all their paperwork, and now we know that they've fallen into arrears. Pressing the easy button is what we call it, making sure that those customers have access the next time supplemental funding comes out makes a lot of sense. Reaching the newly eligible is actually the harder part of that equation, those folks who are not the easy button customers. So I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that in just a moment. But before I get into too many details, I wanted to introduce myself to those of you who may not know me or be aware of NEWAC. The National Energy and Utility Affordability Coalition is based in Washington, D.C., and we bring around the table energy affordability stakeholders to fight energy poverty specifically. That includes utilities and trade organizations, government entities, fuel funds, both private and those administered by utilities, community action agencies, local nonprofits. Basically, if you're anyone who is a stakeholder in energy affordability, you're welcome at our table. That means we have this really broad, diverse audience of folks who get around the table together, and it's my job to get them talking to one another and collaborating, which is interesting. Never a dull moment, because as you can imagine, we don't always agree. So I have decided in my I've been there 5 years, and this is my bit of wisdom. we're not always going to agree. It's just not always going to be possible. However, we will continue to have these discussions. We will continue to provide a forum for the tough discussions when we don't agree. I think the worst thing that we can do is turn our backs on one another and stop the conversation, especially during times like what we've just gone through. So for example, my phone started ringing off the hook almost immediately when COVID-19 hit. And I was shocked at the number of people who were calling me from utilities who didn't know who their LIHEAP state director was, and they needed to contact them. I was the bridge between those two organizations, but I was still really surprised that there were people out there who didn't know one another in the same state when they were so closely related. The customer service advocate at a utility and the state LIHEAP director had never shared an email before. This was very surprising to me. And what I have found is that as we have been inundated with these new funding sources and all of this new supplemental funding that's coming down the pipe, where I'm seeing the most success in states is where there were pre-existing relationships. So if you already knew the housing person in your state and you already knew the utility customer service advocate in your state, and these people were already pre-connected through a variety of different mechanisms, that's where things are working the best. That's what we're seeing. In cases where they have to establish those relationships and learn to know one another and processes, and you're getting together for the first time, of course, I think those are places where there's a struggle and they're trying to catch up with some of the other states that already had those things in place. So that's the first thing. I took notes and I have so much to say on this topic that, I could probably talk for 20 minutes in my opening remarks, but we've got such good questions. I don't want to do that. One thing I will note is that, and many of you may be aware of this, but just in case you're not, LIHEAP is the primary program that we advocate for at the federal level. That's the low-income home energy assistance program. But we've also taken on water affordability. And I like to think that we were instrumental with our partners in making sure that some water utility funding got passed through Congress as well as weatherization and other energy affordability programs. So we do a little bit of all of that. And LIHEAP is different from programs like SNAP. So SNAP, as the need increases, like when there's a crisis, like a pandemic, the money increases to match proportionately the need. LIHEAP is appropriated money annually. And when the money runs out, it's gone. Even if there's a line of people waiting for services down the block, once the money is gone, it's gone. So that's one of the primary reasons that my organization exists, is to make sure that we connect policy leaders and thought leaders with what's going on at the grassroots level so that they understand that and can make good policy decisions. And part of that is what you all at PUCs do as well. So connecting you with all of those folks around the table. I feel like you're just another member of our greater circle of energy stakeholders. I think that what I hear from the folks at the grassroots level right now is that they're really struggling in some cases. Even those that are doing it well are struggling with staffing issues. I'm sure that each of you are probably having similar issues with your staffs. If one person tests positive for COVID-19, you may have to send that person home and everyone they came in contact with. And so if you're a grassroots CBO that's processing LIHEAP applications, it's tough to do. One of the most striking phone calls that I got during the pandemic was from a person at a community-based organization who was administering a crisis, an energy crisis program. And she was at home fielding 200 phone calls a day from her personal cell phone. I mean, that's the world that she was living in right then. And she just needed to phone a friend for a moment. How do we do this? What are we going to do? How do I process all these applications from home? So they've had a little bit of catching up to do. And they're working on that. I have a lot of great practices that I will save and share with you, and a couple of resources additionally, written resources that I'll share with you later in the presentation that will hopefully give you an idea as we gather information about who's doing it right and how they're doing it right that we can pass on to you that will help you. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And thank you, all four of you, for your insights in how things have changed since COVID, how things were before and how things have changed. And I have a number of questions. If we don't happen to get through them all, because I do want to give an opportunity for folks in the audience if they have questions, please stay and talk to the panelists afterwards. Sounds like Katrina has a lot of resources, and Commissioner Coleman has shared a number of resources that are available. And I know Nasuka also has resources. So if you need that assistance, please reach out to them afterwards. But I'm going to turn to Commissioner Coleman first. Just give you an opportunity maybe to reflect on the innovative practices and achievements that you heard from the other panelists, and maybe how that might help states as consumers are trying to figure out from all of these different programs that are out there, how do we get the information to them without adding to their overload? And many of them are really not able to focus on this. They're so busy with their own financial and personal issues. So how do we get that information to customers when they're overloaded?
Sure, thank you. And I would like to echo your comments about the information that's been given by Chris and Katrina and Monica. I am just so impressed with the amount of work that's going on out there in the communities. Of course, we were all affected by COVID-19's pandemic and the issues that it created. But I tell you, I've always had a soft spot in my heart as a consumer, and particularly as at one time a single mother with 3 young kids trying to make ends meet and pay my utility bills. And I've had my water turned off, which was a real surprise. I had no idea that water could be turned off. I thought I was supposed to get it regardless. And having my electricity turned off and having my heat turned off. And so I come from a background of living in public housing and just trying to make it. So I think about what this pandemic did to people who were already living on the edge. And then the severe surprise it brought to those in the middle class that lost so many jobs and were for the first time affected by the inability to pay their bills. So I just like to commend you all for all the great work you're doing. When I was a state senator, I passed a legislation in Missouri, the hot weather law, that restricts utility companies from disconnecting cooling systems or cooling services in the summer when the temperature got to a certain point. My predecessor in the Senate had passed a cold weather law many, many years before. So I try to look at, as a commissioner, balancing the needs of the consumer, the customer, with my responsibility to regulate the utility companies. But I'm certainly excited to hear about all the great work that's going on, and particularly excited about the relationship that NARUC has created and solidified with Nasuka, and that data collection is very important. And I can't even begin to say all the great things about what's going on out in Arizona. That was really impressive. And I agree with you, Katrina. I was ready to stand and applaud. They're doing great work out there. So relative to the chairwoman's Commissioner Rendall's question about stakeholders and getting information out there and not overloading everyone. I think one of the greatest things that's going on is that organizations work together. the information that Katrina was just talking about, that there were folks who should have been working together who had never even exchanged an email. Those days, I hope, are gone forever, because we really need organizations working together so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and that you can make things more streamlined for the consumers. Technology is certainly a great way to do that. And I do know that our Missouri utilities utilize online tools that really make it simple for for their customers and for my constituency to come up with ways to explore repayment plans and programs. And the call centers have been doing a bang-up job getting that information out. And of course, I'm always concerned about the elderly and want to make sure that those who are not internet savvy are getting that information via either telephone calls or mailers within their bills. I actually keep up a lot with what's going on with the utility companies through the paperwork that comes in the mail with my bill. I sit and I listen to it, and when we have our rate cases and the different options that we're considering, but it's still good to see that in front of me when my bill comes. So I just think that we need to have targeted programs that go to the right customers, and that it's not a one size fits all, and that stakeholders can do a really good job by coming up with those programs that help everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if there's any comments you all want to make, or I can move on to some other questions. Katrina, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. I will note that I've been gathering some of these practices that I think are effective, especially for outreach. That seems to be a perennial question that we keep getting asked. And Duquesne Light, for example, used a tech vendor to segment their customer base, and then they strategically identified the best communication method for each of those segments, and they found that it was very effective. So when they looked back, they saw an increase of like 131%, for example, in completed applications for LIHEAP after implementing that system. For others, it's a more blanketed approach, and I would encourage utilities to start conversations about the free money first. So when you have call centers and you're reaching out to customers and you're talking to them about payment plans or extending payment plans, maybe the first thing you should say is not make an assumption that that customer isn't eligible for LIHEAP, but start with LIHEAP, start with the free money first. And I would say arguably, for the low income and the elderly and the people who are living on a fixed income from month to month, who are familiar with our CBOs and our nonprofits, sometimes that's the best vehicle to drive communications. That's their trusted person in the community. But for some of those newly eligible families that I was talking about that are hardest to reach, they have a pride issue when it comes to social services, and their trusted partner are utilities. They do open their mail. They do listen to what their utility has to say. They do pick up the phone when you're calling them from the utility company. So depending on the type of customer, the vehicle that you use to approach them could be somewhat different. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. Some of the successful strategies.
Thank you. And Monica, did you want to add anything? At this point, I can come back to you. Okay. So Chris, I'm going to turn to you, and you covered a lot of the information, but I'm going to just ask you specifically. I know that many of the states in which your members operate, many of the states had to shutter their in-person offices, assistance offices during the pandemic. And Monica, I'm sorry, Katrina, you spoke a bit to that, but are you seeing those open? What issues are happening with those offices? Have some gone digital? How do you address the folks who aren't internet savvy? Can you address some of those issues that's been impacted by the pandemic?
Sure. So the answer ranges across the board. So some states, in terms of consumer advocate offices or commissions that handle customer complaints, Some, such as North Carolina, actually discontinued walk-ins years ago for safety and other types of reasons. Others have accommodated in-person walk-ins up until the pandemic. Some of those have reopened. Some of those remain closed due to COVID. Same thing with utility, in-person payment and assistance, as well as community organizations. So it runs the gamut. I don't think there's any one, and I did an informal poll of a number of NASUCA members and truly got answers from one range to the other. So, you know, in terms of technological impediments, you know, we still in North Carolina, we stood up a website a few years ago to allow people to log complaints online. And then I have a staff of about 15 that just do, now we're down to about 10, but really had all the customer complaints just in and of themselves. And we get very few through through email or through the website. Most people want to call. And I think the reason for that is if you're facing an imminent disconnection, or you're going to miss a payment and that's going to put you into an arrearage, or you're going to miss your payment plan or something, there's an urgency there that requires someone on the phone, as opposed to I'm going to send an email or fill out this form and hope that someone responds to me or hope that someone flags it. And so we have found in North Carolina, a lot of states that really most folks want to pick up that phone and call. And so I will say that with moratorium and so forth, North Carolina used to handle, back in 2013, we had about 16,000 complaints a year. We had about 2,500 last year. So we have watched the volume really fall off because the moratorium and the assistance have been out there. And we're all sort of holding our breath and waiting to see, does that trend line stay flat, which we hope it does, because it's going to show a lot of the stuff is now baked in the cake. But if it starts trending back up, then we're going to have to tackle, all right, what's changing. So
the combination of maintaining that phone access and maybe digitizing some of those back-end processes that were more manual beforehand, is that working?
It is working. And you know, Duke Energy, our largest electric utility, rolled an app out over the last couple of years. And so there's more, and they continue to upgrade that app. So there's more and more ability to work through that as well directly with the company before you ever get to us. So, you know, we're always worried about the cracks and who may fall through and what communication mechanism is perhaps missing somebody, but we're finding that the electronic and the telephone has been pretty effective in addressing needs.
Thank you. And Monica, I'm wondering if, and you talked a bit about this, but can you talk a bit more about what APS is doing? What are the opportunities to move beyond financial assistance, to focus on financial education and energy efficiency, in addition to the other programs you talked about when you were making your remarks?
Certainly, happy to share about that. You know, I think that from a utility perspective and starting with the low hanging fruit, I think it really makes sense to focus on the customer assistance. But one of the things that we also talk about is, you know, how can we help our customers manage their energy bills? And as we look at energy efficiency programs, some of our stakeholders and advocates have started talking to us about saying, since we've made the progress we've made so far, can we start considering moving into some financial literacy education? So those are some of the conversations we're talking about how we can take things forward. We also recently at APS, we increased our energy efficiency funding specifically for low income. We doubled it in 2020 from $3.5 million to $7 million. We've maintained that higher funding level this year. And again, heat relief being a big part for Arizona, have also brought AC repair and replacement in, and are looking at actually doing increased weatherization, including renters, to help get the utility bill more manageable. But additionally, and I don't remember who spoke about it, but around really looking at data and understanding what's what is the behavior? What are some of the elements helping drive the arrearages? One of the things that really sticks out to me right now is when we look at our energy support program, which is our low income discount program, 75% of our customers on that program are current. They're not even 1 day past due. When I look at our organization's total arrearage, in that regard, less than 25% of those customers are low income customers. So it really begs the question in understanding what are some of the drivers, what are some of the different items, and are we missing something by strictly focusing on income? So one of the efforts I'm excited about, I'm fortunate to participate through EEI in their customer service executives and customer solution forum. And what our committee just this year has taken on is this challenge of looking at multiple utilities, doing some data mining, and really trying to drive to understand a little more about some of the behavior and the issues that might be leading to arrearages separate from income. Our goal and our focus that we have set is what we're calling energy sustainability, which we're at this point defining as the ability of customers to pay what's asked of them and to avoid disconnection. And it's important for us to note that because what's asked of them may mean by leveraging more energy efficiency, we can get that bill down. By maybe having some tiered rate options, again, we might be able to bring that bill down. Several utilities have raised their hands and said, we're going to provide the data, we're going to provide a cohort. eSource is going to help with doing the bigger picture data analytics. And we don't really know what we're going to find from that. And I think that's pretty exciting that we're saying we're willing to look at that. We're willing to see what data we find. We're willing to bring, behavioral economics and research into this, and from there share it across the different utilities and see how that may drive us to develop new programs that may not even be on our radar screen today. It may be the financial literacy and education. It may be more on energy efficiency. It may be tiered programs. It may be something completely new. I'm hoping it's something completely new and innovative that we can think through. So I think it's a real focus that we should be having. Likewise, I think that's going to be the next level of work that we do with our stakeholder committee that we meet with monthly. And to say, since we've taken care of some of the pain points, the low-hanging fruits, how do we continue to evolve this going forward to be really meaningful?
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to turn to you, Katrina, for a question, and then I want to open it up to those of you in the audience if you have questions. I think we touched a bit on those customers for whom this has been new to them. So customers that haven't traditionally been part of that cohort that we know receive LIHEAP. And so what are the things that you've discovered of this last year that we could all do to educate consumers for whom this utility affordability challenge is new?
Might be a good time to turn on your mic. This also might be a good time to ask William to put up the one pager that we recently drafted. I think that some of those solutions might actually be appropriate to talk about here. So over the past year, we gathered some information on energy affordability and COVID-19 program innovation during the pandemic. Panic would be appropriate as well. And started by, some background and then going down through talking about how both state agencies, nonprofits, and then utilities were innovative during the pandemic and highlighting some key practices. So I can make this available to you so that you can see some of these, but among those challenges that we see are language literacy and pride. Those are perennial challenges to us. And many of the steps that were taken, especially by utility companies, some of the compassionate practices that they put into effect, like waiving deposits and security fees and waiving extra charges and also extending payment plans, are actually really good no matter what the crisis is. So I'm hoping that they will become permanent parts of their portfolio, that those are things that they'll opt to continue for people who are in crisis beyond the pandemic. But as you move down through, and I think on page 2, there are a couple of utilities expanding the possibilities and utility strategies, talking about some of the things that they've done. We have found that some of the outreach strategies that worked across the board were things like at Spire, where they hosted webinars for their community and they walked through a LIHEAP application with the customers who participated. So they were Zooming with their customer base and teaching them how to fill out the application. Other things were Nextdoor. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the app Nextdoor. Okay, so I wasn't until COVID-19, but now my husband's on it all the time. Apparently, that was one of the most effective ways to market limited income programs and assistance programs. That's what they found, was that they were getting the most return for their dime from Nextdoor. So that was a big thing that they learned during pandemic and had a lot of success there. Also, social media in general, using the apps, technology really pushed forward. There are 36 states at last count that have an online application, but if you're a state that doesn't, reaching out to some of those newly eligible, like I said, pride is such an intense barrier for them. They do not identify as low income, which gives LIHEAP a serious image problem. I know in states like Ohio, they've actually dropped the LI and they just call it HEAP. I can see why they do that, because if you're having an economic hardship, but you don't identify as low income, you don't necessarily think this is for you. So marketing to those customers, an online application has turned out to be one of the best ways that we can do that, because they don't want to go into an office. They don't want to pick up the phone and call necessarily all the time. They want to be able to do it from the comfort and safety of their own home and send you the documentation without ever having to admit, like, I'm going through a rough time right now. So those were some of the things that we found. We tried to place as many of those best practices and effective strategies into this document as we could, while still keeping it sort of bite-sized and sending you out to the websites to give you more details if you are interested in that. So I'll make sure that that's available for everyone.
Thank you, Katrina. That's great information. I know there's never enough time in these panels. So I don't know if there's maybe one person, two people who have questions from the audience. We have time to entertain that. We have Catherine walking around with the microphone. If you could identify yourself and ask your question, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cynthia. I'm from the Arizona Corporation Commission, and I'm a consumer analyst there. I wanted to ask a question to Monica, since we have a lot of questions from the older customers for APS. Can you guys make your pay telephone a little simpler for them? Because they have to go through so many functions and then get frustrated. So if you can try to make that line simpler, it seems like you guys are not going to go back to the drop boxes. And most of the customers are not good with technology, email. Maybe you can make your payment on the phone a little simpler for them. That will help out a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, so the IVR system is one of the areas that has been identified for opportunities. So in fact, I was on calls this morning about some of our improvement projects underway right now. So thank you for that feedback. We are aware of that, and we are absolutely working to simplify and streamline that.
Thank you. I think there's another question.
So I'm from Missouri, and like Commissioner Coleman, and we have a few pockets of metropolitan states, but the vast majority of Missouri is rural, and a large majority of our individuals that are lower income are seasoned individuals. And so what is the best outreach that you've seen to get the information to them about utility assistance and things like that? Because we do have a large number of those individuals in those rural areas, and a lot of those rural areas in Missouri are not very are internet challenged.
Would you like to take that, Katrina?
Yeah, I was going to say I can do this. So one thing that I always encourage the rural programs to consider is the cost of application. And so if you live far away from the main office where you have to drop off an application or go for the application process, there's the cost of gasoline to get there. There's the cost of a babysitter. There's the cost of parking. There's all of these costs that are associated, making copies of your pay stubs, yada, yada, yada. All of those things are things that discourage people from coming in and applying for the program. So there are a couple of best practices. One is drop boxes and putting the collection for the application of materials directly in the communities so that they don't have to drive to a long way. The other are phones. So this is a situation where the phone calls make a lot of sense, and they would much prefer to make a phone call than to drive into town. So making it, and doesn't require broadband, obviously. Cell phones are something that a lot of our folks do have and do utilize. So I would say phone calls and drop boxes are your two best bets. I also sincerely believe that in some of those rural communities, word of mouth and also just being present in the trusted resources that are there in the community, whether that's faith-based and you're at a church or a synagogue that's familiar to them, making yourself available at senior centers, being present in the Aldi parking lot. I mean, these are the things that are just absolutely hitting the pavement and getting the work done that are effective strategies. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but it's what's needed in some of those rural communities to make sure that they have access.
Thank you, Katrina. And thank you to all of our panelists. You all provided excellent and really innovative information, some good ideas and thinking not post, but as we're still weathering through this pandemic. So let's give them a round of applause. And as I said, an hour is not a lot of time for this particular topic, and we could talk all afternoon. If you do have questions for the panelists, they're available. For Monica Whiting, we can provide her contact information if you'd like to reach out to her. Thank you all for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you.